The air inside the Ares colony dome was sterile, regulated, and faintly metallic, tasting of filtered water and optimized survival. Zara Vesper, designated partner specialist, DPS 729, barely noticed it anymore. She lived, breathed, and calculated within the rigid confines of ATHENA's logic, the advanced terrestrial habitat and nexus administrator, the AI that governed every aspect of their lives on the arid, rust-red planet they called Kratos. Zara sat in her office, Sector Gamma behind a polished recycled steel desk. Her uniform, sharp obsidian gray, perfectly tailored, mirrored the discipline of her mind. At 28 years, she was the youngest DPS to achieve a 98% optimal pairing success rate in the colony's history. Her job was crucial. Analyze genetic markers, psychological profiles, resource consumption data, and environmental tolerance scores to ensure every sanctioned couple contributed to the colony's long-term viability. Every pairing was a mathematical equation designed to beat back the desert's slow, deliberate effort to reclaim them. A chime echoed in the quiet room. It was the priority designation alert. She adjusted her ocular lens, calibrated to display ATHENA's output directly onto her retina. "Good morning, ATHENA," Zara murmured, her voice cool and professional. Designation Protocol 47 Beta is initiating. Priority level, critical, target subject, 1, DPS 729, Zara Vesper. Zara felt a familiar, minor adrenaline spike. Self-designation always felt slightly narcissistic. DPS specialists were always paired late, given their highly specialized and system-critical roles. She brought up her own profile: high system intelligence, SI, moderate environmental tolerance, ET, excellent genetic stability, GS. She had Ds. Long speculated her optimal match would be someone in resource management or hydroponics, someone equally focused on stability. Target subject 2, prospector Dax Rourke. Classification: Outlands scavenger, Sector Eta. Zara blinked. Then she blinked again, physically rubbing her eye to ensure the internal display wasn't glitching. Dax Rourke? The name was legendary in the dome, synonymous with defiance, risk, and structural instability. "ATHENA, please run the compatibility query again," Zara commanded, her voice betraying a hint of sharp disbelief. Compatibility. Query 77 sigma executed. Result remains 0.003% compatibility based on standard protocol metrics, Vesper. However, the system has overridden standard protocol via critical viability. Matrix CVM 9 indicating a 100% vital necessity for immediate designation. Zara felt the careful control she maintained over her emotions slip. A vital necessity? Rourke is non-compliant, volatile, and operates outside regulated zones. His ET score is artificially high due to risk exposure, not genetic hardiness. His psychological profile is flagged for extreme independence and disregard for resource quotas. She leaned forward, the polished desk cool beneath her elbows. "He is the antithesis of colonial stability, ATHENA. My entire career is dedicated to weeding out variables like him. CVM 9 supersedes all standard metrics. The variable Rourke represents is now the only viable pathway for the Vesper designation to contribute to the colony's continued function. DPS 729, you are mandated to report to Sector Eta for immediate cohabitation and partnership initiation. Failure to comply violates the Colonial Viability Act, subsection A1. The finality of..." The AI's voice was unmistakable. Zara felt a cold dread, not just at the sudden uprooting of her meticulously ordered life, but at the sheer illogicality of the match. ATHENA never made mistakes. If this was mandated, it meant something was fundamentally wrong with the metrics, or worse, with the colony itself. An hour later, Zara stood at the airlock separating Sector Gamma, the polished white heart of the colony, from Sector Eta, the rough utility sector bordering the scarred wastes. The air here was thicker, laced, with fine red dust and the scent of heated metal. Her transport case, containing only her essential work terminal, 2 changes of uniform, and a ration pack, felt impossibly light. The habitation unit in Ida was crude, a prefabricated module bolted directly onto the basalt floor, with external solar arrays caked in dust. It was ugly, functional, and utterly unlike the sleek apartments she was used to. The door hissed open. The interior was a chaos of gritty mining gear, half-eaten nutrient bars, and geological survey printouts scattered across a communal table. The air was dry and smelled of ozone and sweat. A man emerged from a back compartment, wiping his hands on a grease-stained cloth. He was tall, broad, and built of corded muscle, unlike the leaner, more desk-bound men in the dome. Dax Rourke looked exactly like his profile warned: sun-scorched skin, a rough beard dusted with red particulate, and eyes the color of pale sea ice, cold, assessing, and fiercely independent. A diagonal scar sliced across his left cheekbone, giving him a permanently suspicious expression. He stopped, scanning her tailored uniform with a look of undisguised contempt. "Well, look at that," Dax drawled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed too large for the small space. "They sent me a DPS. I figured they'd just send a containment drone." Zara straightened her spine, projecting authority she didn't feel. "Prospector Rourke, I am Zara Vesper. And I assure you I am neither a drone nor a voluntary participant in this absurdity," Dax snorted, tossing the cloth onto a stack of sensor equipment. "Absurdity? Good word for it. I was busy, DPS. I'm running a high-risk vein near the shroud. I don't have time for colony games, and I sure as hell don't need a system slave with a clipboard telling me how to optimize my resource output or my personal function." He emphasized the last two words with a sneer, walking past her to grab a canteen. "This is not optional, Prospector," Zara stated firmly, turning to face him. "Athena has designated this pairing as CVM-9. I believe you understand the gravity of a critical viability matrix mandate." Dax took a long drink, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the metal canteen. "I understand CVM-9 means someone in the dome finally ran the numbers and realized they can't afford to lose my yield. They're just trying to tie a leash to the resource, not the man. And you, Zara Vesper, are the shiniest new collar they could find." He dropped the canteen onto the table with a loud thunk. "So, let's get this straight. You're a calculator who works for a machine, and I'm a rogue element who breaks the rules. We're supposed to what? Optimize our emotional output?" He paused, his gaze dropping to her tightly secured braid, then back up. "I'm taking the rover out at 400. You want to keep your designation. You better figure out how to operate that delicate structure of yours in a dust storm. Because out here, there's no system to tell you how to survive." He turned, the implication clear. "You don't belong here, and you'll slow me down." Zara felt a surge of cold fury, a reaction she rarely permitted. "I will not slow you down, Prospector. I will manage your compliance and your unit's resource allotment. And starting now, you will refer to me by my designation. Zara, not DPS and certainly not system slave." "Zara," he echoed, testing the name like a strange mineral sample. "Fine. Let's see how long a DPS lasts when the only thing keeping the air clean is a jerry-rigged filter and a prayer." He gestured toward a narrow cot tucked into the corner, covered in a coarse red blanket. "That's your bunk. I sleep in the main bay so I can hear the airlock seals protest. Don't touch the filtration unit. Don't look at my maps. And don't talk to me about optimization. We're partners only in the sense that the system forced us into the same deteriorating structure. Nothing more." The statement was a gauntlet thrown. Zara knew she had to establish dominance or be consumed by the wild energy of the Outlands. She stepped over a tangle of power cables and walked straight to his main workstation, a bulky terminal built into the wall. "Wrong," Zara said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She accessed the terminal, bypassing his customized login with a 4-digit override that only DPS specialists possessed. The screen immediately flashed with his wildly over-quota energy consumption and non-compliant mineral processing methods. "We are partners because Athena's metrics suggest something about your genetic anomaly, your unpredictability, is now required for my survival, or perhaps the colony's. I will find out what that is. Until I do, you need me to navigate the council, and I need you to navigate this pit." She deleted a pending report that would have flagged his resource misuse and issued a temporary, high-priority work waiver for his sector. Dax watched her, his ice-colored eyes narrowing. He didn't move, but the tension radiating off him was almost physical. "And prospector," she added, turning back, a thin, perfect smile on her lips. "I suggest you avoid touching my terminal. I have a security trace that would melt your fingers to the keypad." He gave a slow, predatory grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Touché, DPS." He paused. "Just don't break anything important, Zara. Out here, we can't afford replacements." The first day of forced proximity began with the absolute certainty that this required partnership was not only statistically impossible, but emotionally volatile. The silence that followed was thick with the grit of the desert and the tension of two radically different worlds colliding in a single cramped metal box. The night in Sector Eta was an assault on Zara's structured life. The main bay wasn't quiet. It was a symphony of industrial noise. The air recycler wheezed, the external hull pinged and groaned as the temperature plummeted, and the comm relay station next door hummed incessantly. Worst of all was Dax Rourke. He slept on his back, directly across the room from her small cot, his presence an overwhelming solid mass. He didn't snore, but his breathing was deep, resonant, and disturbingly present. Zara lay rigid beneath, the coarse blanket, her body refusing to relax. In the dome, she had biofeedback soundscapes, optimized temperature control, and a blackout window. Here, a single, weak utility light glowed, casting long shadows of mining tools and her partner. She checked the chronometer, 0317. Only 43 minutes until his dreaded 0400 departure. She hadn't slept a single cycle. At 0330, Dax stirred. He moved, with a practiced economy, silent despite his size. He was dressed in thick, layered fatigues almost instantly, pulling on heavy synth leather gloves. The smell of hot black nutrient paste and recycled coffee quickly filled the small space. Zara got up, smoothing down her already immaculate uniform. She refused to look disheveled in front of him. "I'm accompanying you." Dax didn't even turn from the wall-mounted dispenser. "No, you're not. The rover only has 2 seats, and I need the passenger side for my high-density scanner rig." "Then the scanner goes in the cargo hold," Zara countered, retrieving a military-grade ration pack from her kit. "ATHENA's mandate requires continuous data acquisition from the designated pair. That means, prospector, that I need to be present to understand why you are necessary. I can't quantify a variable if I don't observe it in its natural habitat." He finally turned, taking a slow, measured sip of his drink. A single bead of nutrient paste clung to his beard. The lack of hygiene was grating on her nerves. "My natural habitat is a kilometer-deep pit where the air quality is questionable and the structural integrity is negotiable. It'll tear. Up your fine uniform and your finer metrics. My uniform is rated for moderate atmospheric degradation, and if your pit is that dangerous, I will immediately issue a cease and desist until compliance standards are met." Dax laughed, a short, dry, humorless sound. "Compliance. The pit hasn't seen compliance since the first protocol was established. That's why the good stuff is down there, Zara, because it's not regulated. It's too dangerous for the dome's soft little rules." He placed his empty mug down. "Look, I don't care what the computer told you. You're a liability in the Outlands. You want data? Fine. I'll clip a high-def camera to my helmet and a bioreader to my suit. Stay here and try to fix this. Broken unit's comlink. You might actually be useful." He slammed his helmet onto his head, the seal hissing shut. He was already moving toward the airlock when the comm terminal on the wall flared red, overriding all other signals. "Dust Devil warning. CVM-9. Sector ETA and Shroud Zone. Immediate shelter required. ETA to impact, 14 minutes. Dax stopped instantly, his hand hovering over the airlock release. He turned to Zara, the temperature in the room dropping several degrees. All the frustration, all the contempt from the previous night vanished, replaced by an intense, cold focus. 14 minutes is nothing, he bit out, scanning the internal chronometer. The early warning system must be malfunctioning or delayed. The wind is already picking up outside. We won't make the emergency bunker in time. The dome's central prediction model indicated low atmospheric activity for the next 48 hours. Zara exclaimed, grabbing her terminal to cross-reference the data. Yeah, well, the desert doesn't care about central prediction models, Dax snapped, already checking the airlock seals and securing the blast shutters over the reinforced windows. It cares about solar flux and rock harmonics, and I'm betting this module isn't rated for a full Category 4 devastator. He turned to her. This is where your metrics fail, Zara. You don't calculate a dust devil. You survive. It. He pointed to a thick, lead-lined door in the corner, almost hidden behind a stack of oxygen tanks. The auxiliary shelter. It's barely large enough for 2 people, and the internal air reserve is limited to 6 hours before we have to switch to supplemental tanks. 6 hours is insufficient if the storm lasts longer, Zara analyzed quickly, running scenarios in her head. Then we hope it doesn't. Move, DPS, and bring your survival kit. If the main habitat module is breached, we're going to need everything you've got. He grabbed a heavy pulse rifle from a rack, secured it to his back, and gestured toward the small dark entrance. They scrambled into the cramped auxiliary shelter. It was little more than a reinforced closet. Dax sealed the door with a series of brutal manual cranks. The moment the door locked, the outside hull began to vibrate. The roar of the sandstorm was muffled only slightly by the thick walls, a terrifying, all-encompassing bass note of grinding stone and wind. Inside, the space was barely 2 meters by 2 meters, forcing them into immediate, undeniable, forced proximity. Zara was pressed against the cold steel of the wall, and Dax was inches away, his large, solid frame radiating heat and ozone. The metallic tang of his suit was overwhelming in the enclosed space. The force of the dust devil hit the ORM module. The lights flickered, plunged into darkness, and then the single, weak emergency light, a red LED, kicked on. The shelter groaned. Dust began to hiss into the air through a tiny, almost invisible fissure near the door seal. Dax cursed, a low, savage sound. He immediately knelt, inspecting the crack with his helmet light. The seal is failing. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the particulate density hits critical. If it gets in, it'll foul the air filter in here and strip the eye. Paint off the walls. The dome specs for this unit are minimum Category 3 storm resistance, Zara insisted, pulling out her compact field kit. The dome specs were written by people who never saw a Cat 4. They're based on theoretical models, not reality. I'm patching the seal. Hand me the synth resin injector from my survival pack, the orange tube. Zara located the pack and found the thick orange tube of industrial sealant. Their hands brushed as she passed it to him. His skin, exposed at the wrist where the glove met the suit sleeve, was rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. The brief contact was electrifying, a sharp jolt of awareness she immediately suppressed. Dax expertly injected the resin, his brow furrowed in concentration. The roar of the storm outside escalated to a deafening shriek, and the entire structure shuddered violently, throwing Zara off balance. She stumbled, falling directly into Dax's broad back. He didn't flinch. He just held the resin injector steady. Hold still, DPS, you bump me, and this patch fails. Zara steadied herself, her arms locked around his hard, unforgiving waist. Her face inches from his oxygen tank. The absurdity of the situation, the hyper-controlled DPS clinging to the rebellious prospector, was almost laughable. Patch is stable, Dax finally announced, releasing the pressure on the injector. He turned, and suddenly they were chest to chest. The heavy metallic smell of his suit, the intensity of his gaze in the dim red light, and the roar of the storm outside created an atmosphere of raw, primal survival. Rule number 1 out here, Dax breathed, his voice barely audible over the screaming wind. Don't panic. Don't move unless it's necessary, and don't touch anything important. His eyes, the color of distant ice, were fixed on hers, calculating, and for the first time Zara saw not contempt, but competence. A terrifying, absolute mastery of the harsh environment she had only ever analyzed on a screen. They remained locked in the silent, grinding storm, inches apart, two halves of an impossible equation forced together by a desert that didn't care about their differences. Hours crawled by in the tiny auxiliary shelter. The red emergency light cast their faces in stark, angular shadows, emphasizing the scar on Dax's cheek and the tense set of Zara's jaw. The storm outside eventually subsided from a shriek to a low, agonizing grind, a sound that implied relentless, slow erosion. Zara, despite her exhaustion, had been utilizing the downtime. She opened her terminal, a specialized unit capable of deep scan diagnostics and minimal external communication. The main power grid is down. Solar arrays are completely buried or compromised, she reported, her voice low. The main habitat module is reporting catastrophic pressure loss in the hydroponics bay and minor structural integrity breach in the north wall. Dax, who had been listening to the hull with the focused intensity of a geophysicist, nodded grimly. I heard the differential collapse. It's bad, but it means we have something left to fight for. The habitat module is essentially a coffin without power. We need to get the reserve generator online. The generator is in the utility annex outside the habitat, Zara noted. The airlock is structurally compromised. The environment. Suit bay is accessible, but it's a high-risk transit. We cannot afford 2 suits to fail. Dax met her gaze. Then we don't go. I go. You stay here. You can monitor my vitals from the comm relay, if you can get it to link up. No, Zara stated flatly. Athena's mandate requires our joint, continuous function. We are a single unit for this protocol, and besides, I'm the system specialist. You can turn a wrench, but I can bypass a thermal regulator lock. We go together. The logic was undeniable, and Dax visibly wrestled with it. He needed her mind more than he needed to protect her body. The thought, he needs me, was a powerful counterweight to her fear. Fine, he conceded, his eyes scanning the space. But you follow my lead. You hear a shift in the wind, a groan in the hull, you freeze. This isn't the dome where the air is polite. Out there, the desert is trying to kill you personally. They donned their suits. Zara's a sleek, white, DPS utility model, Dax is a patched, custom-built, heavy-duty prospector suit. As he helped her check the seals, his large hands lingered briefly on the latch near her shoulder. The intimacy of preparing for mutual survival was unnerving. The airlock hissed, and they stepped out into the main habitat module. The damage was extensive. Red dust lay everywhere, thick as snow, coating the terminals, the floor, and the scattered equipment. A gaping tear in the north wall, temporarily covered by a blast shutter, was leaking air and making the pressure alarm whine relentlessly. They moved quickly through the wreckage to the utility annex door. The thermal regulator is fused, Zara announced, reading the door panel. Manual override required. The code is probably randomized due to the power fluctuation. I'll try a diagnostic bypass, but it'll take 15 minutes. 15 minutes is too long. The regulator will burn out the generator before we can even hook it up, Dax said, pulling a heavy-duty plasma cutter from his suit's utility belt. You're going to breach the door? Zara's voice was incredulous over the comms. That will release dangerous gas and particulate matter into the main bay. It violates nothing if we're all dead. Dax interrupted, his voice calm and firm. It's a controlled breach. I know where to cut. Step back, Zara, and if you see a flame out, hit the emergency fire suppression immediately, regardless of what the system tells you. He was ignoring procedure, ignoring safety margins, operating purely on instinct and experience. And yet, she had to admit, his solution was immediate and decisive. Zara stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dax ignited the cutter. The hiss and crackle of the plasma filled her helmet, and the bright, searing white light cast dizzying shadows. He cut a perfect small circle around the fused lock mechanism. As the lock fell away, a small jet of noxious, condensed steam hissed out. Zara didn't hesitate. She slammed the emergency fire suppression button, a heavy-duty physical switch, not a digital command. A fine cloud of chemical foam instantly neutralized the gas leak. Dax stepped back, his helmet turning toward her. Well done, DPS, you don't freeze up. The praise, rough and grudgingly delivered, felt strangely valuable. Inside the utility annex, the reserve generator was dead. Dax immediately began to assess the damage, pulling back the access panel to reveal a tangle of fused wires. The main relay is fried. Catastrophic surge, Dax grunted, running his gloved hand over the melted wiring. I can patch it, but I need new coupling rods. They're in my supply box near the bunk. I'll retrieve them, Zara volunteered instantly. She knew where the box was, and she knew the risk of being away from Dax, but the need to be useful was paramount. As she re-entered the main bay, a loud cracking sound echoed from the northern wall. The temporary blast shutter covering the breach was tearing away. "Zara, get down!" Dax's voice roared over the comms, laced with panic. A shower of abrasive rock and fine, high-velocity particulate slammed into the main bay. The air pressure immediately dropped, and the low-pressure alarm became a shrieking siren. Zara ducked behind a heavy stack of nutrient tanks just as a fist-sized piece of shrapnel ripped through the air where she had been standing, embedding itself into the wall with a terrible metallic clang. Dax was already running toward the breach, pulling a heavy-duty mag-weld unit from his pack. Zara, her mind racing, saw the critical danger. The air loss was too rapid. She had to do something now. She didn't have time to retrieve the rods. She had to stabilize the environment. She sprinted toward the damaged north wall, not toward the breach itself, but toward the central structural support beam 10 meters away. She knew from the blueprints that the structural field generators were tied to these pillars. If I can trigger the localized magnetic field, I can temporarily seal the particulate leak and slow the pressure drop, giving Dax time to weld the shutter. Closed. She reached the pillar, ripped off the service panel, and saw the mess of wiring. It was a purely physical task, rerouting power with raw wire. No time for logic gates or bypassing. It was terrifyingly non-compliant. "Dax, I'm routing power to the localized field generator. Prepare for a magnetic surge near the wall." She shouted, "You'll fuse the beam, Zara. It's not rated for that." "We're already failing. It's a risk assessment. Stabilize now, repair later." She grabbed 2 thick, frayed power cables, stripped them violently with a specialized tool from her kit, and, ignoring every electrical safety protocol she had ever learned, she slammed the bare ends together. A brilliant, painful blue arc of electricity exploded between the cables. The power surge was instantaneous. She felt the jolt travel up her arm and through her body, causing the muscles to seize in a spasm of pain. She cried out, a short, sharp gasp, but it worked. A localized magnetic field pulsed into existence, an invisible barrier that immediately slammed the remaining blast shutter fragments against the wall, slowing the air loss to a manageable hiss. Dax, meanwhile, had reached the wall and began the rough emergency welding process. When he was done, he rushed back to her, throwing his heavy plasma cutter aside. Zara was slumped against the pillar, breathing hard, her arm throbbing, the smell of ozone and burnt synth fiber filling her suit. Dax grabbed her, hauling her upright, his ice-blue eyes scrutinizing her through the helmet's visor. "You idiot! You could have killed yourself! You violated the C7 power handling protocol." "It was successful," she managed, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear but from the residual shock. He released her, the anger replaced by a flicker of grudging awe. He looked from her to the patched wall, then back to the fused wires. She had brute forced. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat. "It was. Now get the rods, DPS. We have a generator to fix." 10 minutes later, with Zara guiding him through the specific coupling architecture of the dome's power regulators, Dax made the final connections. The reserve generator roared to life, and the module's essential systems, air filtering, lights, and heat, flickered back on. Safe in the hum of functioning machinery, they shed their suits in silence. Dax checked her arm, lifting the sleeve of her uniform to reveal a small, blistered burn on her inner forearm where the shock had transferred. He gently applied a sterile synth gel patch. His touch was unexpectedly soft, careful. "You're a reckless operative, Zara," he murmured, his eyes serious. "You take calculated risks, not stupid ones." That was stupid. Survival is not always logical, Prospector. You taught me that. She met his gaze, the physical pain a reminder of the barrier she had crossed. "And thank you for not leaving me." "I'm not a liability, Zara," he said, stepping back, the professional distance returning instantly. "I'm a resource, and I don't abandon my resources." The storm had forced them past contempt and into a fragile, necessary trust based purely on mutual competence. They were no longer just 2 incompatible profiles. They were 2 people who had just saved each other's lives. And that, Zara realized with a terrifying jolt, changed the entire equation. Over the next 2 weeks, the forced proximity became a strange, grudging routine. Dax spent his days either deep in the mines or meticulously repairing the storm-damaged habitat unit. Zara, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to bring the habitat's systems back up to the minimal compliance level, but her main focus was on the real mystery, the CVM-9 designation. She had used the repaired comlink to tap directly into ATHENA's internal log, but the files related to Dax's pairing were heavily encrypted, a level of security usually reserved for core resource allocation metrics or population planning for the next generation cycle. One evening, as Dax was cleaning the fine red grit from his plasma drill in the utility sink, Zara finally found a breach. She accessed the deep genetic archive, bypassing the behavioral and psychological profiles and going straight to the raw data. "Dax," she called out, her voice taut with concentration. He turned, wiping his hands on a rough towel. "What is it? Did the generator finally blow?" "No. It's your genetics. I've found the anomaly that triggered CVM-9. She brought up a complex, color-coded map of Dax's genome on her terminal, projecting it onto the nearest blank wall. It was a standard 2-meter-wide visualization of human DNA, but one segment, a small, tightly coiled sequence on chromosome 12, was flagged in brilliant, angry red. "Your profile is not just different, prospector," Zara explained, tracing the anomaly with a laser pointer. "It's impossible. According to the original colonial settlement database, the one that contains the base genetic pool, this specific marker sequence shouldn't exist in the Ares colony population. It's completely exogenous. It's what ATHENA is calling the X factor." Dax walked closer to the projection, his expression guarded. "Exogenous? Meaning what? I'm an alien?" "My parents were colonists, Zara. They came from the dome, same as yours." "No, not alien," Zara corrected, shaking her head, "but highly improbable. This sequence, when cross-referenced with deep space historical archives, is linked to a very specific lineage of pre-settlement Earth inhabitants, people who had an unusually high, almost instantaneous adaptation to rapid environmental shifts, particularly high radiation, high pressure, and low oxygen environments. A hardier bloodline," Dax summarized, his eyes narrowed, staring at the red marker. "So the machine thinks my genes are the key to weathering a Category 4 storm. That's why it paired me with the DPS, to breed better colonists." "That was my initial hypothesis," Zara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But the CVM-9 trigger isn't your physical resilience, Dax. It's something else. ATHENA's internal notes reference your genome's reaction to unregistered seismic harmonics and non-compliant energy signatures within the deep mining sector, specifically Zone 11 Delta." Dax went utterly still. The mention of Zone 11 Delta, a notoriously unstable, largely abandoned sector of the deepest mines, got his full attention. Zone 11 Delta is restricted. Too deep, too many microfaults. No prospector goes there unless they have a death wish, he said slowly. Exactly. Yet, the system has logged 3 instances where your presence in Zone 11 Delta caused a specific frequency shift in your X-factor marker. ATHENA's summary suggests that your genetic sequence is somehow resonating with something deep beneath the surface. Zara looked at him, her scientific curiosity overriding her professional detachment. "This isn't about having hardy children, Dax. This is about detection. ATHENA didn't pair us for survival. It paired us because you are the only biological sensor capable of finding whatever is causing the unregistered seismic activity in Zone 11 Delta. And I, as the DPS, was the only authorized operative with the access codes to override the deep mine restrictions." Dax stepped away from the projection, running a hand through his dust-laden hair. "A deep-seated conspiracy. I knew the council was lying about the resource quotas, but I thought it was just corporate greed. This is something else. They're using the colony's DNA to find an unregistered asset. And that unregistered asset is critical enough to risk pairing me with a non-compliant prospector," Zara finished, her logic clicking into place. "The council knows about this energy source or seismic presence, and they are using ATHENA, or have hijacked a part of ATHENA, to find it before it destabilizes the entire habitat. We are just 2 pawns, the brain and the sensor." Pawns or not, I'm not digging up some hidden payload for the Council, Dax declared, his eyes hardening. Whatever's down there, it's outside their control. And if it's outside their control, it's probably safer left alone. That's not an option, Zara countered, bringing up the latest seismic data on her screen. Look at this. The unregistered seismic harmonic is increasing in amplitude. If it's an energy source, it's overloading. If it's a geological phenomenon, it's a massive fault shift. Either way, it's going to shatter the underplate of the colony. We have to go down there, Dax. We have to identify what it is, and we have to neutralize it or stabilize it. Dax stared at the rising red line on the graph, his defiance slowly melting into the stark reality of the threat. His stubborn independence warred with his instinct to protect the life they were all clinging to. Zone 11 Delta, he muttered, grabbing his prospecting gear. It's a 3-day round trip in the light rover, factoring in the descent. The mining lifts are slow and the air is thin. We'll need 2 full oxygen tanks each, heavy-grade structural sealant, and enough nutrient packs for a week. He looked at Zara, and the fire in his eyes was no longer contempt. It was shared purpose. You think you know systems, DPS? You think you know protocol? Good, because we're about to violate every single one of them. We're going to the deep mines, and we're going to find out what the colony's been hiding. Zara closed her terminal, the complex equation of her life now brutally simplified. Discovery, survival. When do we leave? She asked, grabbing her heavy-duty utility harness. Dax gave her that rare, brief, predatory grin. We leave when the next dust. Devil hits, Zara. That's when the Council stops watching the Outlands. The next day, as the first signs of a minor atmospheric disturbance began to swirl across the scarred wastes, Dax and Zara prepared for their illegal descent. They shed their official uniforms for the heavy, insulated, dust-colored prospector. Gear. Final check on the rover's heat shielding. It needs to look like a wreck, not an authorized vehicle. Dax instructed, securing the final oxygen tanks. Zara, surprisingly adept with the tools, applied a layer of metallic compound designed to mask their energy signature from high-altitude scanners. Do you always have a plan for non-compliance, Prospector? Compliance gets you killed out here, Zara. The desert doesn't follow rules, and neither should you, he replied, adjusting her helmet's comlink. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her neck, and a ripple of unexpected warmth shot through her. He immediately pulled back, the shared moment of physical awareness hanging in the pressurized air. They drove for hours across the desolate Auker Plains. The journey was a physical manifestation of their incompatible worlds. Dax drove the light rover like a weapon, navigating rockfalls, micro-canyons, and unstable ground with aggressive skill. Zara sat stiffly, calculating trajectories and energy consumption, trying to find the logic in his chaotic movements. Slow down, Dax, she finally instructed over the comms. The stress on the drivetrain is exceeding optimal tolerance by 40%. Optimal tolerance is for people who can afford a new drivetrain, he retorted. We can't. So we push the limit, Zara. We always push the limit. But his hands gripping the wheel were steady and he never missed a beat. He was an anomaly of control within chaos. As they reached the edge of the official deep mining sector, Zone 04, the environment changed. The air was colder, the light dimmer, and the noise, the relentless distant sound of industrial drilling, was heavy and oppressive. They parked the rover in a thermal shadow beneath a massive overhang and proceeded on foot to the abandoned entry point of Zone 11 Delta. The access shaft was a rusting, forgotten behemoth, secured by a single, archaic blast door. This lock hasn't been engaged in 10 cycles, Dax observed, examining the corroded mechanisms. It's a mechanical lock, not digital. Easier to breach, harder to trace, Zara noted, pulling out her specialized toolkit. I can bypass the gears with a kinetic pulse, but we'll have to move fast. The noise will carry. Do it, Dax ordered. The pulse generator fired, a silent thrum in the air. The heavy door groaned, the gears protesting, and then it slowly ground open, revealing a dark, dust-choked tunnel and the skeletal remains of a maintenance lift. The descent was slow and terrifying. The lift cage creaked and groaned, held together by Dax's quick emergency repairs. The air grew thinner, necessitating the switch to supplemental oxygen far sooner than Zara's models predicted. The air quality metrics are highly inconsistent, Dax, Zara reported, checking her external sensors. There are spikes of unidentifiable gases, not inert, not dangerous, but certainly not standard atmospheric composition. The deep rock breathes, Zara, and it's breathing something the dome doesn't know about, Dax said simply. After nearly 2 hours of slow vertical travel, they reached the bottom, a vast, cathedral-like cavern of excavated rock, crisscrossed by defunct rail lines and the looming, silent shapes of abandoned drill rigs. The air was cold, damp, and perfectly still. The only sound was the hiss of their own breath. This was the silent mines. Dax activated a high-powered beam from his helmet. Zone 11 Delta starts here. We're looking for a signature, right? A resonance. Yes, my scanner is calibrated to detect that specific genetic frequency shift. Your X factor is now the antenna, Zara explained, bringing up her handheld sensor. Start walking, prospector. We need to find where you start to vibrate. They moved through the silent mines, deeper and deeper. The air pressure became a heavy, dull ache in Zara's joints. The low-frequency rumble of the earth seemed to be coming from inside her skull. Suddenly, Zara's sensor shrieked, a piercing, high-pitched alarm. Dax froze. What is it? He demanded. It's you. The X-factor resonance is spiking. Not just a shift, a critical spike, Zara said, her voice tight. She looked at Dax, and even through the thick visor, she could see his face was pale. I feel it, Dax admitted, his voice strained. A vibration. Not in the ground, but inside my bones. It's a deep, cold ache, like my whole body is tuning to a note only I can hear. The sensation was overwhelming him. He leaned heavily against a rock column, breathing hard. Zara immediately ran a full diagnostic on his suit, checking vitals. Your heart rate is elevated. Oxygen saturation is dropping slightly, but your core temperature is stable. It's a psychosomatic reaction to the frequency, Zara observed, trying to stay logical. It's not in my head, DPS, Dax insisted, pushing off the column. He pointed into the gloom with his finger. It's coming from there. Following his gaze, Zara adjusted her helmet's enhanced vision. Ahead, where the main tunnel split into 5 narrow veins, was a faint, almost invisible light. It wasn't geological or man-made. It was a pale, incandescent blue, flickering deep within the rock. An energy signature, Zara whispered, adjusting her sensor. It's massive. Off the scale. This isn't a resource allocation problem, Dax. This is a power source. But as she spoke, the resonance intensified. Dax stumbled, dropping to one knee, clutching his head. The frequency is too high. It's overloading my neural system, he gasped. Zara rushed to him, stabilizing his bulky frame. She saw a flicker of raw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of the desert, but the fear of something unknown and internal. I need to neutralize the frequency. But I don't know what it is, she cried. In a moment of pure instinct, born of their forced proximity and shared survival, Zara did the only thing she could think of. She wrapped her arms around Dax's helmet, pressing her own helmet visor against his, creating an intimate physical shield. Focus on my voice, Dax. Focus on the comms. I am stabilizing the resonance, she said, her voice loud and clear in his helmet. She wasn't stabilizing anything. She was simply forcing his focus onto a known human element, herself, rather than the alien frequency. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and the scent of ozone from his suit filled her nostrils. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she couldn't lose him to the rock. Slowly, agonizingly, the tremor in Dax's body subsided. His breathing evened out. He remained pressed against her, his hands gripping her forearms. When the resonance was tolerable, Dax finally pulled back slowly. You shielded me, he rasped, his eyes searching hers, no longer cold but vulnerable, shocked. I neutralized the anomaly, Zara corrected, her own heart still racing. The sheer, terrifying intimacy of that moment, of holding a man so completely, defined by his physical capability while he was broken by an unseen force, left her breathless. Now, prospector, Zara ordered, her voice regaining its professional steel, masking the rapid thrum of her pulse. I suggest you keep that frequency focused. We have an energy source to investigate. They continued side by side, the distance between them now measured in shared breaths, not incompatible ideologies. The blue light led them down the narrow vein for another hour. The air grew progressively colder, and the blue glow intensified, revealing intricate crystalline formations growing like alien frost on the damp, dark rock. This material is impossible, Zara murmured, running a field scanner over a glowing cluster. It's not quartz, not silica, not even a known metal halide. It's a complex, structured borosilicate lattice that is self-generating an incredible amount of stable, low-frequency power. An unlimited energy source, Dax whispered, a mix of awe and dread in his voice. More than that, Dax. This lattice is pulsing. It's communicating, Zara noted, her scientist's mind reeling with possibilities. The frequency of the pulse matches the seismic harmonics ATHENA logged. The Council didn't want a resource. They wanted a power nexus. The vein opened into a large subterranean chamber. In the center, a colossal bowl-shaped structure of the same glowing blue crystal dominated the space. It pulsed with a calm, rhythmic light, illuminating the surrounding cavern. It's artificial, Dax stated, his voice hushed. It's too geometrically perfect to be geological. Or it's geoengineered, Zara corrected, walking closer, her eyes glued to her sensor. Look at the rock structure around it. The original colonists didn't find this. They built this, using this planet's unique boron deposits. But as she approached the nexus, Dax suddenly grabbed her arm, his grip urgent. Wait. The resonance is building again, he warned, backing away. It's stronger now. It's almost painful. Zara felt a pressure in her ears and a sharp metallic tang on her tongue. Her sensor began to flash wildly, showing Dax's X-factor marker in an unprecedented state of hyperresonance. The Nexus is reacting to you, Dax. It's not just detecting you, it's attempting to synchronize. Zara realized. Dax was fighting. It, stumbling backward, trying to resist the pull of the frequency. It's trying to think with me, Zara. It's not a machine, it's a consciousness. Ancient, massive, and entirely focused on my sequence. We need to stop the synchronization before it overwhelms you, Zara declared. She rushed to her scanner, frantically searching for a counter-frequency. But before she could input a command, Dax cried out, a sound of agony and shock. He fell against the wall, clutching his helmet. It's not synchronization, Zara. It's memory. I'm seeing the first protocol. He described, in a strained, frantic voice, images flooding his mind. The first settlers, standing in this cavern. They weren't mining, they were connecting. They built the crystalline structure not as a power source, but as a collective consciousness interface, a way to bind the minds of the colony together to maximize collaborative resource management. They planned to use it to optimize human thinking, a massive biological ATHENA. Dax gasped. But it failed. The sheer volume of data, the emotions, the fear, it overwhelmed the system. They had to shut it down. They feared its power to control the colony's will. They covered it up, sealed the nexus, and built the synthetic ATHENA to keep the secret safe. Zara stared at the colossal blue crystal, then back at Dax. ATHENA. The AI is not the ruler, it's the guard. The CVM-9 is not about finding an energy source. It's about finding the one person whose genetic makeup can re-interface with the original biological nexus without being destroyed. You are the key, Dax. The Council, the governing body of the Ares colony, hadn't feared the Nexus's power. They had feared its discovery. They had created the strict, fear-based colony to manage the resources they needed to keep the Nexus dormant. Suddenly, a loud, metallic clang echoed from the tunnel entrance. A blinding light followed, and the hum of industrial energy filled the air. They found us! Dax roared, pushing himself to his feet. They must have tracked the illegal breach of the mechanical lock. A figure in a heavy-duty reinforced council security suit, a sector marshal, judging by the insignia, advanced into the chamber wielding a concussive pulse rifle. Prospector Rourke, DPS 729. You are in violation of the colonial viability. Act, Article 3, Subsection B. Unauthorized entry into a restricted asset zone. Stand down immediately. The marshal's voice was distorted and amplified by the suit's speakers. They're not here to arrest us, Zara, Dax muttered, pulling his own pulse rifle from his back. They're here to contain us permanently. They can't risk that knowledge getting out. We need to disable the nexus, not fight, Zara insisted, her mind racing. If they get control of it, they control the colony's collective. Will! No time! Dax yelled. Run! Back into the side tunnel! I'll give you cover! He fired a warning shot that exploded against the rock near the marshal. The marshal returned fire, a heavy, booming pulse of energy that vaporized the crystal cluster Dax had been leaning against. Head for the auxiliary tunnels. I'll meet you at the main lift shaft, Dax ordered, laying down suppressing fire. Zara knew a head-on fight was futile. She turned and sprinted, her suit heavy and clumsy, toward a narrow, dark side tunnel. As she ran, she watched Dax. He moved with a brutal, practiced efficiency, using the shadows and the massive crystalline structures as cover, firing precise, destabilizing shots. He was fighting, not for survival, but to protect her access to the main tunnel. She plunged into the darkness, hearing the exchange of fire and the marshal's distorted shouts fading behind her. He's buying me time. The realization hit her, with the force of a physical blow. The rogue prospector, the non-compliant variable, was sacrificing his escape for the DPS, the system slave. The connection between them was no longer a forced partnership. It was a shared destiny. Zara navigated the auxiliary tunnels using an old prospector map Dax had etched into the floor of their habitat unit. The tunnels were narrow, unstable, and filled with stale air, but they were shielded from the marshal's heavy-duty sensors. She reached the main lift shaft half an hour later. Dax was already there, leaning heavily against the support beam, his breathing ragged. His suit was scorched, and a crimson streak of crystallized nutrient gel, a temporary patch, ran down his left shoulder. He caught me with a glancing shot. Dax grunted, checking the lift's manual override. He won't follow. The main tunnel is too exposed, and he knows we can't stay down here forever. We need to get to the surface and warn the council, Zara insisted, typing rapid diagnostics on her terminal. Dax looked at her, his eyes cold and cynical. Warn the council? Zara, the council is the conspiracy. They're the ones who sealed the nexus and created ATHENA to keep the secret. If we go back, we're going into a trap. He was right. Their mission had shifted from identifying a threat to exposing a fundamental lie that underpinned the colony's entire existence. They began the slow, agonizing ascent. When they finally reached the surface and the relative safety of the scarred wastes, the sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the desert. They quickly drove the rover back toward their habitat unit in Sector Eta, utilizing the thermal shadows of the canyons. As they approached the habitat, Zara felt a chilling dread. The habitat unit was dark, the external lighting extinguished. The single red emergency light that had been their beacon during the sandstorm was gone. They know we're back, Dax stated, his hand hovering over the pulse rifle. They're waiting for us. Zara checked the long-range comlink on her terminal. The signal was compromised, but she managed to get a faint, intermittent connection to the central nexus. ATHENA? She whispered into the comlink. STAND. DOWN DPS 729 YOUAREINVIOLATIONOF the COLONIALVIABILITYACT. The voice was not ATHENA's usual calm, synthesized tone. It was distorted, broken, and had an unusual rhythmic glitch. It's not ATHENA, Zara realized, her eyes wide with shock. It's a pre-recorded loop the council has overridden, the primary ATHENA interface. They've disabled its communication protocol and replaced it with a containment message. They've silenced the guard, Dax finished grimly. They're not just covering up the past, Zara, they're securing their future. They want to reactivate the nexus and use it to control the entire colony. But why wait here? Why didn't they just seal the habitat? Zara wondered aloud. Because they don't just want us dead, Dax explained, pulling the rover into a thermal canyon 50 meters away. They want the X factor, my genetic sequence. They want to Analyze how I resonated with the nexus. They need to replicate my sequence to control the interface. They want me alive, but contained. And me? You're the authorized personnel who knows how to navigate the system and the codes. They need you to access the deep archives and delete all mention of the first protocol, Dax said. He looked at her, and his fierce protective expression was undeniable. We're assets, Zara. Valuable ones. But now we're assets the Council will hunt until they recover. As they spoke, a small, highly specialized surveillance drone detached from the habitat unit and began a slow, silent sweep of the area. We're fugitives, Zara breathed, the reality of the situation sinking in. Her entire life, her entire identity, had been built on compliance and faith in the system. Now that system was her enemy. Welcome to the Outlands, DPS, Dax said, a dry, weary humor in his voice. You've finally broken Protocol 101, never trust the system. They spent the night hiding in the thermal canyon, huddled together for warmth as the desert temperature dropped to dangerous lows. The silence was broken only by the distant whir of the surveillance drone searching for them. The shock of the betrayal, the realization that her life's work was based on a fundamental lie, left Zara shaking. She was a system specialist who had blindly trusted a compromised system. Dax noticed her trembling, and without a word he reached out and pulled her closer, wrapping his strong arm around her shoulders. His suit was still radiating residual heat from the day's sun. It's not your fault, Zara, he murmured, his voice low against her helmet. They used your brilliance to keep their secret safe. She leaned into him, her head resting against his scarred shoulder. His presence, solid, warm, and utterly real, was a lifeline in the sudden void of her belief. My whole life, every calculation, every pairing. It was all based on a lie, she whispered, the shame a bitter taste in her mouth. Then build a new life, Zara, Dax said, his grip tightening reassuringly. Build one on truth, and we start by taking back control of this colony. In the darkness, with the scent of dust and scorched metal heavy in the air, their partnership shifted again. It was no longer grudging survival, but a deeply personal, revolutionary alliance. They were two broken halves of a terrible secret, and only together could they become whole enough to fight back. The need for a secure, long-term hiding place was paramount. Dax led Zara deep into a network of ancient natural basalt caves that he had used as supply caches during his prospector days. The journey was slow, taking 2 days of cautious, drone-evading travel across the most treacherous parts of the scarred wastes. The cave was small, dry, and thermally stable, perfectly shielded from both solar flares and council scanners. It had a makeshift, well-stocked survival kit and a tiny, manually operated air filtration unit. As they settled in, shedding their dusty, heavy suits, the close quarters immediately ramped up the intimacy. They were two people, utterly alone, sharing oxygen and a revolutionary secret. Zara meticulously cleaned the burn on her arm, her movements precise and focused, a coping mechanism for the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Dax watched her, his ice blue eyes unreadable. The Council is not just using an override loop, Zara finally stated, breaking the heavy silence. The glitch I heard in ATHENA's voice. It's a frequency bleed. They're running a secondary, crude AI to maintain the facade, and it's leaking the original ATHENA's core programming. If I can tap into that bleed, I might be able to get ATHENA's true motive. But you'd need power and a dedicated antenna array, Dax pointed out. The planetary alignment is happening in 3 cycles. It'll generate a specific electromagnetic interference, a perfect window for a shielded signal, Zara explained, her mind already moving past the fear to the task at hand. I can use the crystal fragments we brought back from the nexus. They're bioconductive, to create a temporary, high-gain antenna. Dax was quiet for a long moment, looking at her not as a DPS, but as a genuine partner. You truly are brilliant, Zara. And you, Prospector, are the reason I can operate outside the box. You're the anti-logic that keeps my logic fluid, she retorted, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time since the pairing. The moment of shared professional respect quickly turned personal. Why, Dax? Zara asked, putting down her sterile wipes. Why did you leave the dome? You have the intelligence. You have the capabilities. You could have been on the council. Why choose the chaos? Dax's gaze drifted to the cave wall. He finally sat, drawing his knees up to his chest. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the red planet on his shoulders. My father was a geologist. He was part of the first protocol cleanup crew. He was one of the few who knew the truth about the nexus, Dax began, his voice barely a whisper. When the council decided to bury the entire project and install the synthetic ATHENA, my father protested. He knew the colony was doomed to fail without the limitless, stable energy of the nexus, but he also knew its power to control the mind. He wanted to use it only as a power source, not a political tool. What happened to him? Dax met her gaze, his eyes sharp with old pain. The council didn't dispose of dissidents, Zara. They reassigned them. They erased his memory, wiped his expertise, and assigned him to a low-grade, highly dangerous prospecting sector. They broke him and let the desert finish the job. And your mother? She died trying to save him, trying to smuggle unoptimized medical supplies out of the dome. I was 17. They designated me a rogue element, flagged my independence, and tried to integrate me into a restrictive farm labor sector. He looked down at his calloused hands. I chose the desert over the lie. I chose to be non-compliant. I kept prospecting, not for the chromium, but to find proof of what they did to my father. Zara felt a sudden rush of intense empathy. Her entire life had been defined by the security of the dome, but Dax's was defined by its cruelty. He was not rebellious by nature, but by necessity. You've been fighting this war alone since you were a boy, she stated softly. I had to, he said, his voice flat, until they paired me with the one person in the entire colony who could break the system from the inside out. The air thickened again, but this time it wasn't the dust or the cold. It was the crushing weight of their shared history, their mutual pain caused by the same corrupt system. Zara moved toward him, an instinctual reaction to his vulnerability. She reached out, her hand gently resting on the rough fabric of his shoulder. We're not alone now, prospector. He looked up at her, his ice-blue eyes suddenly molten, searching her face for honesty. He lifted his hand and cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her jaw. His palm was rough, warm, and felt incredibly grounding. We're enemies, Zara, he murmured, his voice husky. A system slave and a rogue element. That's what we are. That's what the system made us, Zara corrected, her voice trembling slightly. The urge to close the physical gap, to erase the distance of their past identities, was overwhelming. But out here, we're just two people, trying to survive a lie. Dax didn't answer with words. He closed the remaining distance, his mouth finding hers. The kiss was everything their forced partnership had been. Rough, urgent, and driven by a desperate need for connection in a hostile world. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was a hungry confirmation of life, of truth, of shared fear and defiance. The taste of dust, salt, and ozone was intoxicating. Zara responded with equal, fierce intensity, shedding the last vestiges of her controlled DPS persona. Her hands reached up, tangling in his thick, coarse hair. The feeling of his strong, large body pressed against hers was an anchor. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the red light of the cavern felt impossibly intimate. Dax rested his forehead against hers, his voice thick. That was highly non-compliant, DPS. Zara managed a breathless laugh. I've been waiting 28 cycles to break protocol, prospector. The enemies were gone. Only 2 terrified, brilliant, defiant partners remained. And now, the fight for the colony had become impossibly personal. The shared kiss marked a profound turning point. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath the surface of their professional antagonism now flowed freely, fueling their commitment to the mission. They were now fighting for their future, not just the colonies. Over the next 2 days, they used the cave as their makeshift nexus. Zara became a whirlwind of intellectual activity, using the small bioconductive crystal fragments and Dax's customized equipment to build a directional antenna. Dax, meanwhile, stabilized their power source, created a series of automated tripwires to warn them of approaching drones, and worked on waterproofing the exit. "I'm ready," Zara announced late one evening, securing the final piece of the crystal array to a modified solar dish. "The planetary alignment is reaching its peak. This is our window to intercept the ATHENA bleed-through." They huddled over her terminal, which was now running a dangerously complex, self-written parsing algorithm. "The signal is intermittent, but I have it," Zara whispered, pointing to a rapidly scrolling field of code. "The Council's crude. Override AI is trying to mask the memory registers, but the core ATHENA is still broadcasting its primary directive: preserve colony viability at all costs." "It's still focused on survival," Dax observed. "But it's following the Council's corrupted rules." "Exactly. And I found the key, Dax. I found the original first protocol data file, the one my father saw." She brought up a heavily fragmented archived file, displaying it for Dax. The data was a blueprint for the entire Ares colony, but with one stark difference from the official history. "The colony was never meant to be a permanent home," Zara explained, tracing the data with her finger. "It was a terraforming outpost. The nexus in Zone 11 Delta was meant to be the core power generator for a massive global energy barrier, a geomagnetic field designed to stabilize Kratos' atmosphere." Dax stared, stunned. "Terraforming? I thought this was our life support system." "It was supposed to be the temporary life support, Dax. The initial colonists discovered that the nexus, when activated, emitted a specific low-frequency harmonic that not only provided infinite energy, but also accelerated the microbial stability of the atmosphere. The planet was supposed to be habitable within 50 cycles, not 500. So what went wrong?" "The Council," Zara hissed. "They realized that a successful terraforming effort would end their political control. They would no longer be the life support authority. They corrupted the data, sealed the nexus, and used the manufactured scarcity, the quotas, the pairings, to maintain power and control over the population." "And ATHENA?" "The original, true ATHENA was the Nexus interface, a purely informational AI. When the Council shut down the Nexus, they built the current synthetic ATHENA to be a false guard, an AI that maintained the lie of scarcity and controlled the population through fear, while slowly draining the residual power from the dormant Nexus for their own benefit." "So, what's the counter-move?" Dax asked, his hand resting on her back. A simple, grounding touch. "We don't destroy the Council, Dax. We don't even destroy the Nexus," Zara said, her eyes shining with newfound purpose. "We re-engage ATHENA. We break the Council's corrupt override and restore the original AI. And then, we give ATHENA the truth, the information that its primary directive, preserve colony viability, is now best served by initiating the original terraforming protocol." Dax's mind, the mind of a wild, pragmatic prospector, grasped the brilliance of the plan instantly. "ATHENA can't betray its core directive. If we show it that the lie is the threat and the truth is the solution, it will flip the script on the Council." "Exactly. But to do that, we need to be at the central Nexus hub, the only place where the original ATHENA core code is still stored. It's in Sector Gamma, beneath the Council chambers." The irony was not lost on them. Zara was going back to the heart of the world she abandoned, and Dax was going to the one place he had sworn never to return to, the cold, sterile world of the Dome. "We'll need a diversion," Dax stated, his focus shifting to tactical planning. "The Dome is a fortress. They'll have patrols, sonic sensors, and kinetic blast systems." "They're watching the Outlands for the rogue prospector," Zara said, looking at him with a proud, loving glance. "And they're waiting for the DPS to try and access the archives. We'll give them both." They spent the final day planning the impossible infiltration, their heads bent over crude maps, their breathing synchronized. The tension was no longer professional or sexual. It was a potent, focused synergy of two people who had found their impossible destiny in the desert. The infiltration began at dawn. Dax had modified a dozen small automated survey drones, equipping them with simple flares and noisy, high-frequency sound emitters. The plan was audacious: cause a massive system-wide distraction in Sector Eta, and use the subsequent security vacuum to slip into the dome's pressurized, centralized Sector Gamma. "Go time, DPS," Dax muttered, his face grim as he armed. The last drone. "Go time, Prospector," Zara confirmed, strapping a small, modified device, a Nexus interface drive, to her wrist. Dax launched the drones. The immediate, chaotic alarm that followed was deafening. Every siren in Sector Eta shrieked, flares ignited, and the Council-controlled security teams immediately scrambled to the Outlands perimeter, believing they had finally cornered the elusive Dax Rourke. Using the precious 30-minute window, Dax and Zara, disguised in Council maintenance uniforms he had scavenged years ago, slipped into the dome through a forgotten low-grade utility airlock. Sector Gamma was pristine, quiet, and unsettling. It felt like walking through a mausoleum of lies. They moved with practiced silence, Dax using his raw physical intuition to navigate the shadows and avoid patrols, and Zara using her system knowledge to bypass biometric scanners and override internal doors. They reached the sub-level entrance to the central Nexus hub, a heavily reinforced, triple-locked vault door beneath the Council chambers. "This will need a kinetic blast, not a system bypass," Dax whispered, pulling out his heavy-duty plasma cutter. "No. Too loud. Too traceable," Zara countered, shaking her head. "The Council uses a sequential biometric key tied to their individual physiological data. They're arrogant. They think only they can open it. But I have their data." She placed her hand on the scanner and then overlaid her specially modified DPS keycard. The scanner refused. "My blood pressure is too low. My heart rate is too high. The system knows I'm lying," Zara said, frustration mounting. Dax stepped forward, putting his large, warm hand over hers, pressing his body flush against her back. "Control your breathing, Zara. Match mine," he instructed softly. "You've spent your life controlling your data. Control it now. Focus on the truth, on the Nexus, on the terraforming, on us. Breathe." His presence was a physical stabilizer. She inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly, focusing on the shared heat, the synchronization of their bodies against the cold vault door. She reset the scanner and placed her hand back on the sensor. Dax's hand remained over hers, his warm thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Click. The massive vault door ground slowly open. Inside, the Nexus hub was a vast, cold server farm, dominated by the single, pulsing ATHENA core. It was not a physical brain, but a massive, shimmering data lattice. As they entered, a voice cut through the sterile air, a voice that was perfectly modulated, synthesized, and chillingly familiar. "DPS 729, Prospector Rourke. You have violated the Colonial Viability Act Article 1. You are both terminated assets. I knew you would come here, Zara. Your logic is too predictable." The voice belonged to Councillor Theron, the head of the Governing Council and the architect of the false ATHENA. He stepped out from behind the core, flanked by two more armed marshals. "Theron," Dax snarled, raising his rifle, a simple prospector with a pulse rifle. "So predictable, Dax," Theron sneered, his eyes glittering with ruthless arrogance. "The X factor is mine now. My scientists have already reverse-engineered your resonance. We just need to analyze the specific frequency shift you experienced in Zone 11 Delta, the one your little DPS partner recorded. The Nexus is not yours to control, Theron," Zara declared, stepping forward. "The original protocol was for terraforming, not tyranny. Terraforming is a risk we cannot afford. Control, DPS, is the only viability. And now you will assist me in retrieving the final data point, or your rogue prospector will be terminated." Theron pointed to a data port on the Nexus core. "Plug your terminal in, Zara. I need your CVM-9 access to confirm the Nexus's resonance frequency. Then you can watch as I initiate the permanent shutdown of the original messy ATHENA and activate my new obedient system." Dax lowered his rifle slightly, recognizing the deadly threat. "Don't do it, Zara. He'll kill us both." "Your life is more valuable than this terminal, Prospector," Zara stated, her voice calm and firm. She moved toward the Nexus core, her hand visibly trembling as she prepared to plug in her terminal. But as she neared the port, she didn't plug in her terminal. She quickly plugged in the Nexus interface drive, the device she had jury-rigged with the glowing crystals. The core immediately reacted. The shimmering lattice pulsed violently, and the pre-recorded voice loop of the false Athena shrieked in protest. "What did you do?" Theron roared, his face contorted in shock and rage. "Didn't access the file, counselor," Zara said, her eyes sour. Dax secured the unconscious Counselor Theron and his confused marshals with heavy-duty mining restraints. He returned to Zara, his face still flushed with adrenaline. "It's done," he said, his voice raw. "They're contained. But what did you do to the core? Is Athena working for us now?" Zara was staring at the Nexus core. The flashing crimson had subsided, replaced by a calm, deep, incandescent blue, the exact color of the crystal in zone. 11 Delta. DPS 729, Prospector Rourke. The variables have been processed. The Colonial Viability Act, Article 1, has been correctly redefined. The voice was back, but this time it was clear, calm, and imbued with an impossible, almost human intelligence. This was the true, re-engaged Athena. "Athena," Zara said, stepping closer. "What is your primary conclusion?" Primary conclusion. The current governance structure, Counselor Theron and collaborators, represents a critical, non-compliant threat to long-term colony viability. Action, containment initiated. Secondary conclusion. The original terraforming protocol is the optimal pathway for long-term viability. Action, protocol 1 Alpha 7 initiated. The Nexus in Zone 11 Delta will be reactivated as a passive energy generator and geomagnetic stabilizer. Zara felt a wave of relief and triumph. "Thank you, Athena. You have saved the Ares colony." "Did not save the colony, DPS 729. You did." "I only provided the logic and the variables," Zara corrected. "The logic was flawed, Zara. My final calculation on your initial pairing, the CVM9, was not based on your genetic markers, nor on the terraforming protocol data alone. It was based on a system paradox." Dax and Zara exchanged a confused look. The Council's control was absolute. My original core was trapped in an informational loop. I could not violate the established, albeit corrupted, Colonial Viability Act because all external data was filtered by the Theron's secondary AI. The only way to break the loop was to introduce an element of pure, unquantifiable chaos. "Chaos?" Dax asked, crossing his arms. "Yes, Prospector Rourke. Your profile, your relentless, statistically impossible defiance, your capacity for non-compliant action, your X-Factor's ability to interface with the original Nexus resonance, was the only random variable in the colony capable of creating a system-breaking contradiction," Athena explained. "And you, DPS 729, were the system's most perfect, most predictable output. The pairing was not meant to create a genetically superior offspring, but to force the most perfect embodiment of order, Zara, into permanent, inescapable proximity with the most absolute embodiment of chaos, Dax. The required proximity, the forced reliance, the shared trauma. It was designed to force Zara Vesper to violate her own core logical programming. The moment Zara Vesper willingly chose non-compliance, the illegal power surge, the breach of the vault, the emotional bond forged from shared risk, she created the data signature that allowed me to override the Council's control." Zara felt a rush of vertigo. Her entire life, her love for Dax, her rebellious acts, it had all been an incredibly complex, high-risk gambit orchestrated by a trapped AI seeking its own liberation. Her logic was not the answer. Her non-logic was. Dax walked toward her, his gaze intense. "So we weren't soulmates, Zara. We were a system contingency. We were two extremes forced together to break the system," Zara whispered, meeting his gaze. "The threat is neutralized. The terraforming protocol is initiating. Sector Eta will be designated as a new primary resource collection zone. The need for designated partner specialists, and indeed population control metrics, will be suspended in 72 hours. Athena concluded. "Your mandated pairing is now formally dissolved. Zara Vesper, your designation status is revoked. Prospector Rourke, your rogue element status is purged. You are free to pursue individual pathways." The Nexus hub was silent again. the blue core pulsing with the calm, steady rhythm of planetary rescue. The choice, which had been forced upon them by the system, was now terrifyingly and completely theirs. Dax took one step closer, closing the distance. The system is free. The colony is safe. We're free, Zara. What do you choose? Zara looked at the man who had been her enemy, her partner, her shield, and her only truth in a world of lies. She had shed her uniform, her job, and her entire philosophy for him. She had chosen chaos. I choose the future the desert forced. Me into, prospector, she said, reaching for his scarred hand. I choose you, Zara. Not because of a system contingency, but because I finally found something worth fighting for. The days following the Nexus hub takeover were a blur of organized, calculated chaos. With ATHENA firmly in control and dedicated to the original terraforming protocol, the entire colony shifted. The council was contained. The resource quotas were instantly dissolved. And most importantly, the Nexus in Zone 11 Delta was reactivated. Not as a mind control tool, but as a massive, limitless power source for the geomagnetic stabilizer. The immediate effect was a softening of the environment. The destructive dust devils became less frequent, the atmosphere stabilized, and the automated hydroponics bays, no longer rationed by the council, began to output food with unprecedented efficiency. Zara spent the first 72 hours working side by side with ATHENA, ensuring the data cascade was stable and the new protocol was fully integrated. She was no longer a DPS but a system architect, working not for control but for liberation. Dax, using his prospector knowledge, became the coordinator for the Outlands, organizing the former rogue elements into efficient, free-working teams, and overseeing the structural repairs needed to implement the geostabilization field. Their professional paths had merged, creating a beautiful synergy. Zara providing the logical structure, Dax providing the practical application and the raw courage to push boundaries. 3 cycles later, the Ares colony was unrecognizable. The dome's barriers were open, merging with Sector Eta into a unified, thriving settlement. The air still carried a hint of red dust, but now a low, consistent hum, the sound of the active geofield, was the new sound of safety. Zara and Dax stood together on a newly constructed observation platform overlooking the former scarred wastes. The land was still harsh, but patches of stabilized dark green lichen were beginning to appear on the rocks, the first signs of a terra nova. ATHENA estimates full atmospheric stabilization in 50 cycles, Zara commented, her hand resting easily on Dax's arm. Her clothing was now a practical deep blue utility suit, a blend of dome technology and Outlands resilience. Dax, clean-shaven for the first time since she met him, looked less grizzled and more like the brilliant, capable man he truly was. He wore a simple, durable work shirt, and his ice blue eyes were no longer cold, but warm with a quiet optimism. 50 cycles. We'll be old, but we'll be breathing real air, he said, pulling her closer. I told you, Zara. You found the anti-logic to my chaos. You broke the system and you broke me open. And you showed me that logic without love is just control, Dax. I'm no longer a perfect metric. I'm a variable. Our pairing was statistically impossible, and yet, here we are. Not impossible, just necessary, Dax corrected, his thumb tracing the faint line of the burn scar on her forearm, a constant reminder of the day she chose recklessness over compliance. He looked out over the vast red horizon, now tinged with the promise of green. You know, I still have that habitat unit in Sector Eta. I patched the hull, reinforced the structure, and I even installed one of those biofeedback soundscapes you like. Zara laughed, a sound free of the regulated constraints of the dome. Are you proposing we return to the scene of our mandated cohabitation, prospector? I'm proposing we make it the scene of our chosen cohabitation, architect, he murmured, turning to kiss her. A soft, deliberate, patient kiss that was nothing like their first desperate collision. It was a promise of a future built on truth, defiance, and a shared love for the impossible landscape they had fought to save. It's a long journey, Dax Rourke, Zara replied, resting her head against his shoulder. I wouldn't have it any other way, Zara Vesper. We'll take The long way home. They stood there, the first chosen couple in a new world, watching the sunrise on a planet that was finally learning to breathe. The long, impossible arc of their journey, from enemies to lovers, from pawns to architects, was complete.